Hello, everybody. Happy Spawn Daily. Welcome to another Comic Source Comic Boom collaboration. That's right, we're continuing. Third day in a row, third day of the new year. Happy January 3rd, everybody. And we're rolling right along with our Spawn Daily. Haven't missed a day yet. Wonder how long we're going to be able to keep saying that. But 3 days in, the year of the Spawn, as we've said, and as our graphic shows you there, a day without Spawn is like a day without sunshine. So just like Spawn is shining down like the sun in our graphic, we're going to shower you with Spawn every day of the year. And the hopes being that we get caught up to all the way up to the modern issues and talk a little Spawn universe, King Spawn, Gunslinger Spawn, Scorched. Hopefully have Todd on at some point. Hopefully, it's the 30th anniversary of Spawn. He's announced that it's a big year for Spawn. Hopefully that means the movie production is going to get underway. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But there's going to be a lot of Spawn content coming for the 30th anniversary. Have no doubt. And we hope to be a part of it by reading every issue of Spawn. So if you're wondering why we're already on issue 15 here on day 3, we did do 12 days of Spawn Miss and covered the first 12 issues anyway of Spawn leading up to Christmas. And Rocky and I both felt they held up relatively well, especially when you consider they're a little bit of their time in that comics back in the 90s were a lot more expositional than they are now. Now it's a trap that Todd McFarlane himself as a writer falls into a lot of times, being a little overly expositional, but the guy made his name as an artist, not necessarily a writer. So we'll see if that gets better as it marches along. But we did cover the first part of a 2-part story with Violator fighting medieval Spawn. So we're gonna finish that off with Spawn number 15 today as we roll on. And before we dive into that, I'll throw it over to you, Rocky. How you feeling so far about Spawn Daily? Are you excited to go on this journey?
Well, yeah, I am. I do. Look, I've always been. Spawn is one of those things where I lost interest in Spawn after like the 12th or 13th issue. And, for the last 30 years, I openly admit that I wasn't really much of a follower of Spawn. I thought, there's a reason, guys. There's a reason why all those Spawn issues from issues, whatever, 75 to 275 are worth money, because they had low sales. Spawn didn't have a lot of high sales because it was, but what it had was endurance, and it was intellectual property that Todd McFarlane loved and he cherished and he nurtured, and he got different artists on it. He got different writers on it over the past 30 years. It wasn't just himself. He wasn't, while he might have, he loved his own character, obviously, but he had no problem sharing it. And Todd McFarlane himself has openly admitted that other writers have written Spawn better than he did, that have drawn Spawn better than he had, particularly Greg Capullo. And he cherishes that. He loves that. And by doing that, by great characters are characters that other people want to write and other people want to draw. And that's contributed to the Spawn mythology over the last 30 years. So I would be lying if I said I'm not. There's a reason why. Look, I'm not insane. Part of me is insane good Lord, I'm going to be reviewing an issue of Spawn with you every day. Oh, yeah. I mean, obviously, I'm a little bit off my rocker. I mean, we both are. Come on. But there's a reason that I want to. It's because it's Spawn. If this was any other character, I wouldn't know it. But it's Spawn. And part of me, I want to see what all the hoopla is. I want to see how this character has evolved over the years. And we talked earlier about how McFarlane with his pop culture references. You can tell this was in the early 90s, 1992 when it debuted, 2022. It's a 30th anniversary. It's going to be interesting to see how the writing does evolve through the different writers. We've already seen a handful of different writers, from Alan Moore to Dave Sim. And I know I forgot a couple there, but we're getting a bunch. This character is going to be evolving, and there's a reason why it's a popular character now. It's not just because of comic book speculation. There's supposed to be a big movie coming out. We talked about that sort of off podcast, and I don't know. I'm very interested to know where this storyline goes, and just to see if this I want to see if all this hoopla is warranted. I'm probably going to be a little bit tired at times when we do podcasts on Spawn if we're going to be doing like 300 in a row, but I don't know. I've been, if we can do 15 or 16 issues of DC Comics every week, we can sure as heck give some dedication to Spawn. So I'm looking forward
Yeah,
to it.
yeah. The fact of the matter is that this broke the record, right? The longest running creator-owned series of all time,
That's right.
and
Yeah.
yeah, you give Todd a lot of credit for keeping it going, even when maybe the sales didn't warrant it, and if he didn't have his toys and his other ventures to keep it going, maybe it would have ended. But he's always had a dedicated core fan base, I think, that have been reading Spawn and enjoying it. So yeah, I'm curious. I mean, 3 decades, 30 years of Spawn. It's crazy. I can't think of any other property that's been around that long that in the superhero genre that I have so little knowledge of. The fact that Todd McFarlane is a legend in our industry, the fact that Spawn's been around for 30 years, and I did collect it, for the first couple of years and then fell off and never read any of it. Like, it's kind of crazy to me. And so I feel like it's definitely a hole in my comic book knowledge, and we're going to remedy that this year with Year of the Spawn. So let's dive into issue 15, Rocky. We get a massive info dump right on that first page. So give us a recap.
Yeah, well, again, Todd McFarlane and his info dumps, and in this opening page of issue of issue 15, the info dump is interesting because the info dump could actually literally be cut and pasted. This could have been an info dump at the beginning of the previous issue because
Yep.
it literally tells us nothing new, but it would have been nice to know sort of a review of the summary of what the Violators' history is, because I got to admit, it wasn't entirely clear to me what the Violators' punishment was in the earlier issues, but this opening page actually clarifies it, that the Violator was this, of course, another servant of
Malabolgia.
Malbrosia, what?
Servant of Malabolgia. Yeah.
Malabogia. I always got to write that down. But he's a servant, but because he failed to take out, I mean, he was given the mission of basically killing Spawn in the early issues, and he failed because he tries to take out all these mobsters, and he's figuring his master plan. Like Violator is an idiot. He really is an idiot, and he's referred to as an idiot by the devil or Malabrosia thinks he's an idiot too. He's not smart. His idea is to kill all the mobsters to attract Spawn. And all he did was he actually decreased the crime rate by scaring everybody in the city. Everybody stayed home, and he ended up pissing off. He did ultimately get, Spawn never got blamed for it anyway, and he pissed off he pissed off Malabrosia, and so he's punished by putting in this fat diminutive frame where he's like 3 feet 10 inches high. He looks ridiculous. He looks disgusting, and he's basically relegated in the last issue of telling stories to prop up his ego to a bunch of children that he's got to pay to listen to him. I mean, this guy's pathetic. And this issue, it continues the story. And last issue ended where he's telling the story and he's completely lying about it. He's telling the story about when he, as the Violator, took on medieval Spawn. And he describes himself in the previous issue as being the hero of the story when, of course, he's the villain. And he was, of course, a very unreliable narrator. We talked when we reviewed issue 14 how Todd McFarlane, is good at telling a story with his art, but he just doesn't tend to. He tends to overuse exposition, despite the fact that he doesn't have to. Well, it actually works here to some effect because the art continues to convey the story that medieval Spawn is the hero in the story in the art, but in the story as it's told by the Violator, medieval Spawn is the villain. And his attempts, there's this evil witch that he has to kill along with medieval Spawn, but of course it's really a beautiful damsel in distress that is the princess, and medieval Spawn is actually the gallant prince of the story. It should be noted that these two issues are called myths. That's the story arc, myths. And because this is really a myth, it's often said that the victors always get to tell the story. And of course, here we have part of the mystery in the first issue, part of me was thinking, well, Violator is the one telling the story. And so, you have to survive to tell the story, and survivors generally get to tell whatever story they want because there's no one that's going to contradict them here. And the only thing contradicting Violator's story is the art, the gorgeous art of Todd McFarlane. But in any event, moving forward, the story itself actually moves forward at a quick pace. Last issue ended with Violator using his an energy blast, and he literally fries Spawn in his armor, only to discover in this issue that Medieval Spawn very wisely teleported out of his armor, and it was a great sort of strategy on the part of Medieval Spawn, because he disappeared out of his armor and then he reappears without his armor, and he basically, and I'm oversimplifying, he hacks Violator to pieces with his sword. And it's a long, protracted battle scene, and there's it's exposition heavy, totally unnecessary on the exposition. All the exposition establishes is the fact that is how angry Medieval Spawn is, and how of course how the Violator in telling this story is making it look as if he performed better in the battle than he actually did. All the great moves that Medieval Spawn did, he takes credit for as he tells the story to the children. But
not to interrupt, Rocky, but here's something that just kind of struck me as we're talking about this, and the fact that we could say it's alternate truth, or it's fake news, to borrow some current terms. And in a lot of ways, what we're seeing here with this story is kind of similar to what we saw in Strange Adventures, where what the words say that's not reflected in the actual pictures. And it's kind of interesting, and don't get me wrong, I'm not giving Todd any credit for, predicting the future, and Todd wouldn't take that credit anyway. But it is kind of funny how it all comes back around when you think about it.
Yeah, no, that's entirely true, and even with the pop culture references in the earlier issue, it feels, even though this comic book is 30 years old already, but with the pop culture references, I still remember Beavis and Butthead. I still remember Schwarzenegger, Stallone, Van Damme, which are referenced in the previous issue. Van Damme referenced in the previous issue. I mean, maybe it's just because we're older readers, so but we can't help that. But it is rather interesting that even 30 years later, Beavis and Butthead has made somewhat of a comeback in some circles, and who doesn't? I mean, Schwarzenegger and Van Damme and Stallone are they're not completely off their game yet. Yeah. But in any event, there is a tragedy here, because while Spawn defeats the Violator rather handily, it's a Pyrrhic victory for Medieval Spawn, because this beautiful damsel in distress, this beautiful princess of this very, in one ways, this is a very tropey tale of this powerful Medieval Spawn sort of prince who never shows his face, rescues the damsel in distress. Unfortunately, by teleporting out of his armor, the Spawn reveals his true body form, his true self, and of course he's burnt, and his entire body is burnt. He looks disgusting. And the only thing that looks more disgusting than Medieval Spawn without his armor is the Violator. He kills the Violator, hacks him to pieces, and so you have this disgusting looking Medieval Spawn because he doesn't have his armor, and he rescues the damsel, the princess, but she sees his true face, and unfortunately, almost like it's the opposite of Beauty and the Beast. This particular beauty did not appreciate the Beast. She shuns Spawn and is afraid of him, and Spawn loses his love, or pardon me, Medieval Spawn loses his love, and he loved this woman, and there's a sense of tragedy to this story, and the irony here is, in a sense, even though Violator tells the children about this battle that he lost, the devil, Malabrosia, actually compliments and gives Violator a compliment because he managed to accomplish something in his defeat, because he made it however unintentional it was for the Violator to do this, that Spawn, medieval Spawn, lost his true love, lost his love, and so the
Yeah, he
Violator.
gives Malabulja gives him credit for two things. He says you've done an admirable job of having the new Spawn prove that he has the potential to be a fine officer in my army for the battle against heaven, and
Right.
you've also destroyed the only thing that he held dear, another human being actually loving him. And we see medieval Spawn is actually crying as the woman
Yeah.
runs away, and he says, please don't do this, I beg you.
Yeah.
And he's crying like here's
Yeah.
this heroic figure, this ultra powerful Spawn character, and he's crying because he's lost his love. Although you kind of wonder like how much of a relationship could they have had, at least physically. Almost none. You would think if he never could take off his armor, she'd never seen him outside his armor. And obviously there's more to a relationship than physical, but I mean
Yeah.
that's a part of it. That's a
Yeah.
part of it.
But you got to wonder though that part of me, I would think he'd have the power to transform himself into a person. Like
Right.
I mean, even Al Simmons transforms himself into a human, but it's not the same human. He comes back as a white man when he does that. But I'm wondering, medieval Spawn probably wasn't even thinking though. He probably could have had medieval Spawn known that his woman would reject him so fantastically. He probably would have engaged in a little bit of deception and used some of his power to cloaked the way that he looked, but he didn't do
Yeah,
that.
one thing I wonder about, is that just an illusion? Like so you appear to be normal, but if she actually touches your skin, if it is, are you all hamburgered out?
Yeah.
I wonder that. And the other thing is that when it's a great double page spread when we finally see medieval Spawn outside of his armor for the first time, he doesn't look, obviously he looks horrific, but he looks different than Al Simmons does. Especially he has like some flesh like melted over his mouth that we see later on when he's yelling. You can kind of see the skin stretch out and that sort of thing. So he does look horrific, and there are similarities in terms of there's no hair and he looks burnt and
Yeah.
the green eyes or whatnot. But it is of note. It is something I noticed that, hey, not all Hellspawns look the same. And the other thing I noticed is, again, illustrating the point that nothing the Violator says is true. He talked last issue about this wart covered witch, and I think that the princess that McFarlane draws in this story is maybe the most beautiful woman in terms of the way Todd presents her. In this very regal manner with what she's wearing, and there's no warts. She's smooth. She's smooth. So, kind of funny.
Yeah. No. Yeah. It. Like I said, all to underscore the tragedy of it all. And there's another portion of this that I find quite comical too. That leave it to the Violator to, as he's telling the story to the children, he made another passing reference. The Violator takes credit for introducing dragons to human lore. Because in one scene, of course, as the Violator, he looks like a dragon. He portrays himself like a dragon with green skin, and I thought it was quite funny because I'm trying to find the page here, but he actually looks like a dragon, and again, now you got to know that the Violator is probably lying. He's probably not the first Hellspawn to ever portray or look like what we think of as dragons. But I just love this because the Violator is such a spectacularly powerful liar that you can actually, it's almost like listening to a more clear version of Bizarro speak in the DC universe, because you can literally listen to the Violator and everything that comes out of his mouth, you simply have to take the opposite of it and you'll understand exactly what the truth is.
Yep.
But
yeah, my legacy endures. I was the first dragon. Yeah, right. He's like, they didn't get the color right. I wasn't green, but yeah, the ego on the guy, right? Like next to his idiocy and his just propensity to lie, his ego is right up there as another aspect of his personality.
And just the final thing, and I sound like a broken record saying this, because in every single issue, there's an example of Todd McFarlane's lack of subtlety. You mentioned before that the tears of Medieval Spawn is he's crying as this woman that he loves is leaving him because he's so disgusting and he's got a burnt body, and she's just rejecting him because she thinks he's a horrible thing. Uh, the tears literally come down the page. You got
Yeah.
the green eyes of Spawn on top of the page, and he says in the word balloon, "I beg you," begging her to come back, and the tears literally drip down the entire page, like past the halfway mark of the page. Todd McFarlane is making it very, very clear to the reader that this is a tragic tale. Again, almost overdone, but not overdone. He makes his point. But again, he rams the point home. He tells you what the emotions are in the exposition. He tells you what the emotions are in the art. He doesn't have to do both, but he does. And again, it's, we definitely know the story. I mean, there's not a lot to figure out here. He spells it out for us in more ways than one. And yeah.
Yeah, there's not a lot of subtlety, and even when if you stop to think about it, yes, very tragic for Medieval Spawn. But you wonder, especially because their relationship, the fact that Medieval Spawn had never been out of the armor, so how strong was the relationship anyway? It must have been one of very much of mutual attraction in terms of personality and intellect. But how strong was the relationship really if it was only skin deep for the princess, right? Because as soon as she sees that Medieval Spawn looks horrific, she completely rejects him. So he might be better off in the long run. Poor guy.
And the other way to look at it is compare this damsel in distress with Wanda. This sets Medieval Spawn apart from modern day Spawn, Al Simmons, whose wife Wanda is the total opposite of this princess, this damsel in distress for Medieval Spawn. Al Simmons, it's another very unsubtle way of saying how much better and how extraordinary Wanda is as the former wife of Al Simmons, because she's just so, she loves him and everything else. But at the same time, it sort of makes you wonder, will Wanda, if and when at some point in the future, I'm guessing, will Wanda discover what happened to Al? Will Wanda reject Al when she sees that he's actually the Spawn and has a burnt, disgusting body? Will she act the same way as this damsel in distress, as the princess in this story? Will it be another future mythical tale that will be retold incorrectly by the Violator 800 years from now? I mean, these are the questions that I'm like wondering, like, is Wanda going to be the same way? Wanda is this great woman, yes, but how is she actually going to feel when she sees Al Simmons for the first time? That's what I'm thinking now. And I don't know. I don't even know if that happens in the future issues, but this is what I'm thinking because I've not read the future issues. So all these questions going through my head.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think from what we know of Wanda, you would say no, she wouldn't reject him. She might be shocked, and then a little horrified, taken aback, and probably really sad.
Yeah.
But yeah, she's the way McFarlane's presented her as this very heroic person, and not even just the way he's presented her, but we know so much of this is autobiographical. I mean, obviously Todd McFarlane wasn't killed and gained superpowers from hell, but there's a lot of Todd McFarlane and Al Simmons, right? At the beginning of last issue, we had the whole baseball thing. For those that aren't aware, Todd McFarlane was at one point a minor league baseball player, but knew he wasn't going to advance very far. He couldn't hit, much like myself. I love baseball too. I think Todd and I are cut of the same cloth. Great, could run real fast, steal a base, very good defensively. Just bat wasn't there. But there's a lot of autobiographical stuff, and we saw that when we had the issue that who did was it Al? No, it wasn't Alan Moore. Was it the Alan Moore issue or the
for with what
for the Not Spawn? Who did the Not Spawn issue? Who wrote the?
I think that was Alan Moore. Yeah.
No, Alan Moore. I think Alan Moore.
No, that was Dave Sim, right? Because
it was. You're right. Yeah, Dave Sim. When Dave Sim did that one, and we got the Not Spawn, who really was Todd McFarlane in the Spawn costume, and got to go meet his daughter. And so again, there are autobiographical, and it's great. Obviously, Todd McFarlane loves his wife. He's been with her for decades. Wanda is her name. No coincidence, right? So some interesting aspect there. So Yeah, go ahead. A little bit
Yeah,
more to this
yeah.
issue
There's
as
just a
well.
little bit more to finish the story up. I mean, and so that's how the medieval Spawn story sort of ends with tragedy. He defeats medieval Spawn, defeats the Violator, but loses the love of his life. Or afterlife, as I guess you could come and think of it as. And then it ends with Terry Fitzgerald, the new husband and former best friend and previous friend of Al Simmons, who's now married to Wanda. He's on a phone call, and he continues to get threats from the organization of Jason Wynn. Jason Wynn, knows that they're fearful that Terry Fitzgerald might say something or know something about what really happened to Al Simmons regarding his death, that he was actually killed by Chapel and what have you, all those secrets. And so Terry Fitzgerald is a little bit worried. And meanwhile, of course, you got the beautiful Wanda Blake. They're sleeping with her head on the pillow, none the wiser. But it should be noted that Wanda Blake herself has been having dreams of Al Simmons as well. And so everything is building to a head here. So, I gotta, if I'm using modern day storytelling sensibilities here, I would say this is probably exposition heavy, unnecessarily so, but the story is good and compelling, and it's keeping me intrigued, and it's easy to follow, and the characters are well defined. And so I think, like, I'm entertained. Like, I'm not doing this every issue that I'm reading a Spawn so far. I'm not doing this reluctantly. Like, this is actually good reading. I'm enjoying this so far, and I hope this remains the case as we move forward.
Yeah, I agree. I'm enjoying it as well. Yeah, is it a little over the top? Yes. Does it lack subtlety at times? Very much so. If this was, done today, even by McFarlane, I think a lot of these mistakes wouldn't be wouldn't be repeated because Todd is a wiser and better creator now than he was. But also, comics have changed. Their aesthetic has changed. Comics were a lot more expositional back in the '90s, and we
Yeah.
have said this is a little bit of its time. Um, but that being said, this goes, this is probably on the extreme of expositional. But again, if this were rebooted today and redone, or were being released today for the first time, I don't think it's quite the same level of exposition. So again, it's of its time, but the bones of the story are good. They're interesting. It has us intrigued when we're wondering things. Well, yeah, we see this story of this tragic tale told sort of backwards or in a bizarro like way by by Violator. But even this story of tragedy raises more questions about Al Simmons. Like Rocky was saying, what happens when Wanda sees Al for the first time? Out of his costume, his armor, so to speak. What will her reaction be? So there are sort of some built-in mysteries. And again, I am very. This goes beyond just, hey, I've never read Spawn. I feel like I need to read it. Like I'm engaged. I'm interested. It's pulling me in. And the last thing that I'll mention about it, and if you're joining us on YouTube, you'll see it there in the bottom right hand corner of the page Rocky has up. Next issue, Grant Morrison and Greg Capullo. So we don't go too many issues. I think issue 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, we had Todd back handling the writing chores, but only what 5, 6 issues before he turns the writing uh, duties over to another very legendary, well-known writer, Grant Morrison, and Greg Capullo, who many people their first exposure to Greg Capullo art was on Spawn, and it's sort of where Capullo made his name as an artist. He had done a lot of work for Marvel and uh, other characters. He had a long run on Quasar, where I first encountered his art and thought he was an okay artist. But and we'll talk about it when we talk about issue 16. Uh, it's a little hard almost to differentiate the fact that this is Greg Capullo art as opposed to Todd McFarlane art. There are differences, and again, we'll talk about it when we get to issue 16. But it's very interesting. It wouldn't, like, if somebody showed me and I wasn't aware that Greg Capullo had done Spawn, but if somebody showed me maybe some select panels from issue 16 and said, "Whose art is this?" I don't know that I would be able to identify it as Capullo based on what his art looks like now. So it's very interesting, and Spawn is definitely what made Greg Capullo a hot artist and put him on was the Wizard top 10 artist every month. He was always there. It was Spawn. It was Spawn that put him on the map. And so,
Yep.
I think a lot of people don't realize how early on in the run that Capullo became involved. I mean, this is only issue 16. We're less
Yeah.
than 2 years in,
And
less
just to
than a
give
year and a half in.
and just to give a modern day reference and a shout out to Greg Capullo is, one of the reasons why I think his art why his art works so well with Scott Snyder, because he Snyder was always good at doing darker stories. Of course, we reviewed Scott Snyder's Comixology, stories of Clear and Night of the Ghoul, and look at the death metal. Look at metal and death metal for DC. Very darker tales, perfectly suited to Greg Capullo's art. I mean, the Batman run, of course, Court of Owls. Greg Capullo, I mean, went on to become legendary. This is 30 years ago. And Greg Capullo, I mean, you want to talk about paying your dues. I mean, Greg Capullo, yeah, he's an A-lister now. But this guy back in the day, I mean, he's paid his dues. This is a 30-year career. This guy's been in the industry a long time, and he's earned his success. And it's really interesting. It's going to be really interesting to see and look with a more, I guess, dare I say, an adult, more, I guess, disconcerting eye or detailed eye now as a reviewer, just reviewing his art to see how much it's evolved, because he's certainly one of the more prominent artists in today's world, comic industry.
Yeah, and I would say that newer comic readers, people who've come to comics in the last decade are going to know Greg's work mostly from Batman or those events at DC that he's done with Scott Snyder, like you said. But he's also done 2 issues, soon to be 3 issues of We Have Demons. Speaking of Comixology originals with Best Jacket Press with Scott. So
Yeah.
I can't wait to see, because again, getting that start on Spawn, the series that sort of put him on the map, that was darker, that didn't have didn't worry so much about blood and gore and violence and what have you. That's We Have Demons, right? They get to cut loose and do whatever the hell they want, and it's been fantastic so far. So it's going to be great comparing what we've got from Greg artistically on We Have Demons, his current, versus, hey, let's turn the clock back 30 years, 29 years, whatever it is, to when he first got started on Spawn. And again, I don't know that I would recognize it looking at those issues of We Have Demons, and then looking at issue 16 of Spawn. Would I be able to tell that it was Greg or not? So, but we'll talk about that next issue, and I'm excited to do so. And even though I'm not the biggest Grant Morrison fan, as longtime listeners of the podcast will know, I'm curious to see his take on Spawn.
Yeah, no, I am too. And again, I mean, how many, the next issue will be the 16th issue. Even in today's comic book world, good Lord, to have Todd McFarlane he's had a lot that's 5 A-listers he had on his title in 16 issues. I mean, okay, now granted, back in the day, maybe they weren't as A-list back then, but I mean, they weren't bad. Grant Morrison, Alan Moore, Dave Sim. Yeah. Dave Sim has the second longest running independent title, and he had it up until Spawn dethroned him with his Cerebus. So, I mean, good Lord, it's amazing how this all comes together, and it's almost like every great artist, every great creator, to use that term, to use that phrase by Einstein, was built on the shoulders of giants, so to speak. I mean, it's I can't, but we can, and it's amazing. All these collaborations, how all these writers and artists, their collaborations build on each other, and they help each other build careers. And so it's interesting, and it's one of the things I love about reviewing, engaging in this with you with this Spawn Daily, is that we get to see this, we get to see that growth, and sort of look back and say, I can see this, and you can kind of connect the dots historically. Because I'm a student of history, and I love that, and it's just it's good to see. It's good to see. It's nice to see people being rewarded for hard work over a lifetime of hard work in the industry.
Yeah, you can never say that Todd doesn't hustle. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And the other aspect is, even though he's had these A-listers come in and handle the writing chores, this is the first time. Issue 16 will be the first time he's got someone else drawing it, which I find very interesting as well. But when you talk about who he's had so far, right? Including Morrison, who I think does the next 2 issues. Alan Moore, followed by Neil Gaiman, followed by Dave Sim, followed by Frank Miller. It and then a few issues, 5 issues later, or what have you, 6 issues later, Grant Morrison. It really also goes to show how amazing what the Image guys did was. Like, they jumped ship from Marvel, and Todd still had the clout to get those 5 guys to write his book. Like, amazing accomplishment. So,
Yeah.
and yeah, I was thinking about earlier today, still would love to have Todd on to talk about how much input did he have into what these guys wrote, right? Like Neil Gaiman creating Angela, creating uh, Medieval Spawn, Dave Sim going absolutely no subtlety whatsoever in criticizing the comic industry for taking advantage of creators. Whatever the hell Grant Morrison's going to do, I haven't read the next 2 issues yet. I flipped through 16. I haven't actually read it yet, so we'll see. But yeah, how much did he know what they were going to write, or how much did he have an outline? Like, I'm so curious. So hopefully we'll get Todd on. So I would love to have him come on like once a month, like every 30 issues or so, and talk about that. Can you define these 30 issues in terms of that's about a 3-year period of Spawn? What was it like during this era? So, but again, I've reached out, haven't heard back. But we'll see. We'd love to have Todd come on and talk about the books and certain eras and ask him questions and whatnot. So hopefully it happens, everybody. And if you want it to happen, reach out to him on social media and let him know. Tell him you want him on Spawn Daily. We'd really appreciate the support. So anything else to add about this issue, Rocky?
Uh, No, I just it was aptly named Part 2 of Myths. It was called Myths, and it's the story told by a very unreliable narrator, and actually very well told by the unreliable narrator, because we understood exactly what was going on.
Yep, it was the exact opposite of what he was saying.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So, all right, everybody. Thanks for joining us as always. Don't forget to tell your friends to check out Spawn Daily. If you've always been curious about Spawn, join us. Join us on the journey. We very much like to hear from you along the way. So don't forget to head over to YouTube, do a search for Comic Space Boom ! That's Rocky's channel. Be sure you subscribe, ring the notification bell. That way you know when new content is coming out, Spawn Daily and otherwise, because Rocky puts out other content as well, like our DC Spotlight and his reviews and whatnot. So like this video, which also helps our reach. If you are just joining us for the audio portion only, be sure you go to your favorite podcasting app or platform and subscribe to the Comic Source there so you don't miss any of the other audio only content. So we really appreciate the support as always, everybody, and we'll see you for more Spawn Daily tomorrow.
We certainly will.